Hello, very warm welcome to everyone who has joined us for this Facebook discussion today about this fascinating book, um, Once Upon a Time in Murree by Dr. Umar Mukhtar. My name is Vijiha Haider. I'm a Lahore-based journalist currently working for the News on Sunday, taking care of the magazine's book and travel sections. I'm delighted to be in conversation with the author of the book, Dr. Umar Mukhtar Khan, and Director of Forman Christian College, Lahore, Dr. Jonathan Adleton. Thank you to the LLF and Iman for inviting us. I shall begin by introducing our distinguished speakers tonight and discussing a little bit about the book, Once Upon a Time in Murree. Professionally trained as a doctor, Umar joined civil service in 2000 and worked with Pakistan Customs for some time before doing his master's in public administration from Harvard University. On his return, Umar worked with the Department for International Development, now Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, UK, as governance advisor for 8 years. Besides Pakistan, he has undertaken assignments in several countries, including the United Kingdom, Turkey, Austria, France, Ukraine, and Slovenia. Currently, he's advising on economic and public sector reforms in Pakistan. He was born in Lahore and has lived in many cities of Pakistan during the course of his life. A proud Abdalian, trekking and exploring Pakistan is a passion for Umar, and he has written extensively on sustainable tourism and heritage. He lives in Lahore with his family. Dr. Jonathan Adleton is an American diplomat and author who was born in Pakistan in the 1950s. He spent his early years with his parents in Upper Sindh, then attended the Murree Christian School. He has been a USAID mission director for India, Pakistan, Cambodia, Mongolia, and Central Asia, and has also served as United States ambassador to Mongolia. USAID representative to the European Union and in Brussels, and senior civil representative to southern Afghanistan in Kandahar. His publishing credits include a memoir of his childhood in Pakistan, Some Far and Distant Place, which was published in 1997, Undermining the Center, The Gulf Migration in Pakistan, published in 1992, and The Dust of Kandahar, A Diplomat Among Warriors in Pakistan, a book that was published in 2016. He's currently the rector of Forman Christian College in Lahore. Thank you so much, Umar and Jonathan, for being here with us today. So before we dive into this conversation, I'll tell you a little bit about the book and what we will be discussing today. So Once Upon a Time in Murree is both a beautiful travel guide and a historical account of Murree, with gorgeous hand-drawn maps that evoke nostalgia, nostalgia about the place that it once was, a place that was equipped with beautiful heritage that most of us are not even aware of, and with the speed with which it is deteriorating, it is quite possible that we never will, or most of us never will, unless of course someone does something about it soon. As stated by the author in the book, the main idea behind the book was to document stories from Murree of yesteryear and make people really relive those days. And I think it was exactly what the book achieved. This book makes you explore Murree all over again, and go see all the amazing things it still has, things that might not stay there for a very long time. So Umar, I would like to begin with the title of the book, Once Upon a Time in Murree. The title actually is both fairy tale-ish and but sad in that it depicts something that once was there but isn't anymore. Tell us a bit about how the title was conceived and the story behind it.
Thank you, Vijaya, for the introduction as well as a bit about the book. I think, Vijaya, Once Upon a Time in Murree, the title, I think it was more of like when I was writing about the book, and the title is very important at times, and you, I think, spend a lot of time on both the title in terms of the exact word as well as the title picture or whatever you call it. So when I was thinking about it, I realized that most of us don't think that Murree, exists in the form it used to in times gone by. So that was my feeling when I was finally, thinking about what should be the title of the book. It's all about, Murree existed. Murree Ridge as such. Murree existed, I think, since whenever. But Murree Ridge and this colonial British town existed since 1849. I think over a period of time, especially after 1947, and especially in last few decades, it has lost its original, I think, feel in terms of the rapid commercialization. There are like 6 and 7 stories hotels all around, and I think in that sense, it has lost its touch in a big way of that colonial British hill town. But what I also felt was that people don't know about Murree. It's my own story of learning over a period of time that I used to go to Murree, I think, every year in my life, and then first with my parents, then with my friends, then later on with my family. And I used to, Murree was for me the top of the ridge from Kashmir Point to Mall Road and that kind of thing. When I started writing this book, I started exploring Murree a bit in more detail. I think there were a few books I read about it. One was, I think one of the best was from Dr. Farooq, and then there was another by Virgil Medema, who was a USAID director. And then there was another book, I think, Mystique Murree, or by one Miss Lala Rook. So there were a few books on Murree, which I when read, then I realized that Murree has so much, a lot to offer even now. So there were so many churches, old villas, schools, and other hotels and buildings that I got fascinated by it. And then I started writing. So back to your original question, then basically I thought that it was once upon a time. It doesn't exist anymore unless you have those eyes to look at it. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. So I understand that you have traveled extensively all over Pakistan and abroad as well. What made you choose Murree for this book, or focus on Murree for your book, for your first book?
So as you mentioned, that I worked a bit when I started writing, it was purely on travel. Then I graduated into, I think, heritage, and more I think about it, it's more about sustainable tourism as well, and protecting our heritage, protecting our environment kind of thing. So Murree, I think it was, as you say, that the title is a bit like, it gives a sad feeling, or it gives a nostalgic feeling. So my view was that Murree, we can still revive Murree, and that's I would say one of the goals from this book was that still we can revive a lot of what we have lost. They are still there. We have so many relics, so much history all over Murree. So that was one reason that I chose Murree, because I think still, Vijaya, whatever we think, I think I don't have the numbers right now, but the tourist flow to Murree is, I think it can be equal to tourist flow to all other destinations in Pakistan. It's just like that the upper middle class and elite of Pakistan have left Murree, but still we have a lot of people who go to Murree every summers, every weekend, every national holiday. So it's still people still relate with Murree, and majority of our people. So those were some of the reasons that I actually chose Murree. Thank you.
Fascinating. So Jonathan, I understand that you were born in Murree in the 1950s. Tell us a bit about your earliest memory of the place, how you remember it, your association with it, basically the Murree of your childhood.
Yeah, no, thank you. Again, it's an honor to be here. Again, Jonathan Adleton, now living in Lahore. Those years in Murree were basically first 18 years of my life, 57 to 75. My parents lived in Sindh, so it was a boarding school situation, Murree Christian School, sort of toward Gadial. And I think it was an interesting time, and I think also maybe something of a subculture, maybe something of a surprise to people. But so you have the pre-1947 Murree, and then you have the independence of Pakistan. And I think, of course, the declaration of Islamabad as a capital brought Murree, more into the limelight. But I think in the 50s, it was sort of the British had left. Some of the missionary community had arrived. It was a hard border with India. They couldn't send their kids to Missouri or the places in India. So they basically set up a language school and they set up a boarding school. And that was the environment, the subculture, if you will, where I was born. It was a beautiful place, obviously, and vivid memories in every which way. I will say that I came across Omar's book first in a bookstore, and then I saw that there was a Facebook about it, and that's how we connected. But I think there's a little subculture people may not know about to tap into, because when I've shared it with friends, and even the title, Once Upon a Time in Murree, I think it captures it. And I think for my generation, I should say that Murree Christian School is closing its doors. It's a different era now. But the sort of Once Upon a Time in Murree really captured it for a whole lot of my friends. I did my own memoir of Murree, and it's interesting to me because I called it Some Far and Distant Place. And I think it still has that evocative kind of like once upon a time, some far and distant place. And people said, some far and distant place, is that a question of space or time or whatever? Because of course here I am born in Murree, but obviously an American citizen, but so much of my childhood rooted in Murree. And it was, the views, I share people's concern with how Murree's changed. And, sometimes I think, my goodness, when the big earthquake comes, some of those structures are going to slide down the mountain. What happens then? But the fact of the matter is the setting is so beautiful, and you can look, you can't change the setting. You can't change that view toward the Pir Panjal Mountains. You can't change the view that from Gadial on a clear day, you could actually see Nanga Parbat. And, that row of mountains is just so spectacular. I don't know how far I want to go with this because we want to ask some more questions, but, for me, it's the childhood memories. And I think one could say that one's childhood memories are all often very vivid. When we had our own 3 kids, my wife and I, my wife's from Scotland, we used to say that one of the gifts you give your friends is a sense of overwhelming natural beauty. And obviously Murree, the town, it's developed in all kinds of different ways, but overwhelming natural beauty, that setting of those mountains, what could be a better childhood than to grow up in the Himalayas? And I feel incredibly lucky and incredibly privileged because of that.
True. So how did you come across Omar's book?
I'm one of those guys, and I that's one of the reasons why I like in Pakistan, actually, because the bookstores, you never quite know what you're going to find. This is obviously a recent book, so it sort of stood out. But maybe I give my shout out, since this is the Lahore Literary Festival, to bookstores in Pakistan, because to me it's still a bookstore. That's the bookstore is often the sell beyond, what do you say, the older books are still there. Sometimes you run across them. You never know what you're going to find. And of course, this was a newer book, so it was sort of out front. And of course, the picture, by the way, the picture of Lawrence College, when I was a kid, we used to play, soccer against Lawrence College. And that front picture evoked a lot of memories for me, because we'd go over and, those old halls, which I guess date back to maybe the late 1800s, just the evocative, the sort of somewhat of a British influence. Because you'd have tea afterwards. It wasn't quite like cricket, but you'd have your soccer match and then you'd join together for tea. I don't know if those customs are still there or not. But again, just the very cover, maybe it stood out. And then Once Upon a Time, I don't know, you asked about the title for Omar, and I think Omar gave a good explanation for it, but I love the title. And again, I'm sharing this book with a lot of people, and it was not just Americans, that missionary community at that time, New Zealand, Australia, the UK, even some European countries. And because of the closure of Murree Christian School, it's brought a lot of people together. And every time I mention that book, every time I post it on Facebook, I get a whole lot of comments about it. I wish it was a little bit more easily available on Amazon and places like the States, because people have asked me, can I order a copy? And I say, well, look, next time I come to the States, I'll bring a dozen copies with me, but it's a heavy book and I can't accommodate the demand. But the last thing to say, actually, which was why it was so evocative. Look, there's 3 pages on Murree Christian School, and each of those photographs are fantastic and very, very evocative. If you look, you'll know what I mean. Beyond that, Park Lodge, I knew 2 families that lived there. I never knew it was a Masonic lodge back in the day. Rock Edges, where I was born, which is, that beautiful view of Kashmir, fantastic. I was born in one house there. It's now a cadet college. My sister was born down below. by the way, that copy I bought for Omar was for my sister's birthday present. I don't think she's listening, at least I hope not. But it's for her because she was also born in Murree.
That's nice. So, Omar, when is it going to be available on Amazon?
Yeah, it's actually available on Amazon for some time now. So yeah, so anyone can. But I understand. I'll sort it out with Jonathan how to make sure that it's more easily available in America. But it's available on Amazon. Yeah.
Hey, that's wonderful.
It's actually, I mean, it's available on Liberty Books, so they
Yeah.
basically mail it everywhere, wherever you want to, Sange Mail and everywhere. Yeah.
All right, that's good. So there are two striking features of this book, which I personally am in awe of. One is the detailed photography, which was exactly what the book needed, I think, and the maps. These beautiful hand-drawn maps, which to me are very interesting because they give off a sort of a Lord of the Rings kind of vibe. So needless to say, I found them to be extremely delightful. Tell us a bit about the story behind these hand-drawn maps.
Yeah, so when I travel abroad, most of the time it's like you go to a downtown, you get a very user-friendly map, and then you can just walk around the streets and you would know that this is this house, this is this house, and it becomes very easy for you to navigate. So when I was writing this book, when actually I had written this book or a major part of it, I realized that I can still not tell people that if it's on Bank Road, what does it mean? That people wouldn't know about Bank Road, or people wouldn't know about Hall Road, or so then this idea I made. I think the first map I made myself, which was I think I should keep a copy of it as well. But then I requested a dear friend Sabah Khan, who is an artist from National College of Arts. I requested her to make those maps for me, and I think she did a brilliant job. So and what I've done is that I have maps for north, heart of Murree, south, and suburbs, so that you can just have this map in your hand, and probably we can. And I got a very good feedback about those maps. So I think our next step should be that we should have those maps actually, available in various bookshops, or just those maps, so that people, even if they are not interested in history but they want to see a building, they should just go and it's easy for them to navigate. So yeah, I think that's a value added component of my book, that it's definitely added a lot of value to this book. Yeah.
And you also collected archives, deeds, photographs, documents from all over Pakistan, for the purpose of this book while you were researching. How daunting a task was that?
So I think, Vijaya, this was tough, I would say, because if you get picture, I wanted to have permission for every picture. So for example, I tell you about Virgil Medema, which is Jonathan's friend as well, but we never knew, I didn't know Jonathan beforehand. So now I had no idea where Virgil is. I tried to Google, I couldn't find him. He was in Pakistan in 90s. And some of the images I wanted to use were from his book. Then I just, I found somebody, a lady associate professor in one of the universities in US who went by the name of Medema, and I just found her email, and I shoot an email to her that, do you know Virgil Medema? And she came back a day later that he's my father. So then she connected me to Virgil, and Virgil was, I would say, he was very kind and very gracious to actually allow me to use many of the images from his book. But then I also had to go to, for example, National Army Museum in UK, British Museum again in London, to get permission from many books. And it's a tedious process. I mean, with COVID, they would not respond to the email for many days, but then they were like gracious enough to allow me to use many of those photographs. Mujib, I think the reason I also was talking to probably you or somebody else, that I wanted second edition for this book. Reason being that after writing this book, I have so much new information with me that I actually think that, okay, I mean, for example, there is a Sunday home which was actually the hostel for Jonathan when he was studying at Murree Christian School. So I knew about that particular building, but I couldn't find that building. I thought that it would be in Murree Christian School. So, and frankly, very few people know, and it's a beautiful building. So, but now I know where exactly it is. I can actually get photographs from Jonathan for that building. And so similarly, there are other information. I have a very good, I got to know somebody from St. Denis who had studied in 60s in St. Denis. And she shared with me some new stories about St. Denis and a very interesting prospectus from St. Denis, which is an interesting read. I'll put it on my Facebook sometime. But the point is that it was daunting, but it was like, it was a passion for me. So I enjoyed collecting that kind of information from people, from individuals, from institutions. But I think I have some new information now as well to share whenever I am able to. Yeah.
So when is the second edition out?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I think the problem with people who love Murree is, like, I think Jonathan is one, and we can talk endlessly. but I seriously think that I want to do. I think in few months' time, I think probably early 2021. But I just want to update it a bit, the current edition at some point, maybe next year sometime. Maybe I'm not able to do it, but that's what goes in my head, that I should update it at some point. Yeah,
that's nice. So Jonathan, your memoir, Some Far and Distant Place, it's a coming of age story that combines family history, social observation, current events, and personal commentary to tell a story that has much to do with the intersection of cultures, as it does with one man's life. Tell us a bit about the various cultures, subcultures of Murree, and if or how they affected you while you were, growing up, because you spent 18 years, the first 18 years of your life in Murree.
Yeah, no, that's interesting for for a lot of different reasons. And again, I think in some sense it was a bridge to the British past, which of course was was part of the whole story. By the way, speaking of records, the records office in Murree actually burned down a number of years ago. And so my birth certificate, the proof that I was born in Murree, went up in smoke. Of course, I have my own copy as well. But it was interesting to me because on that birth certificate, again, this would have been 10 years after independence, it was kind of out of British India. One of the questions that my parents had to put was caste. Which caste do I belong to? So again, it was sort of that precursor and that transition. Obviously, as a kid, the missionary subculture was certainly part of it. But I don't even know for sure. I'm not an anthropologist, but I think we call them Gujars that were passing through, the nomads passing through town. I mean, that was a pretty interesting aspect of it as well. I think you did get the beginnings of the emergence of Murree. I sometimes call it the honeymoon capital later on, like the Niagara Falls of Pakistan, because it's a beautiful place to go for the honeymoon. But you began to see some of that domestic tourism, begin to emerge as well. The 60s, this will really date me, but the Teddy Boys era, people going up and down the ball, I guess maybe, who knows, influenced by the Beatles for all I know, but the 1960s, that was coming on. There was an international angle though, and again, I mentioned the missionary subculture, but the embassies, there was an American consulate in Murree. I know that Omar refers to it. I think he's actually got a picture of a guy called Christopher Van Hollen raising the American flag at the American consulate. Now, there's a couple things I'm going to say about this. I was 4 years old. At about the same time, or a little bit earlier, his son was being born in Karachi. This is Christopher Van Hollen Jr., who's the U.S. senator from Maryland. And I think Pakistan knows he's kind of got like we all do. He had a soft spot for the place where we were born, and that's part of the story. But another part of the story is, all those years later, I'm talking about post-university back in the States, Christopher Van Hollen had become ambassador to Sri Lanka. He had retired. He was at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, writing articles. I was his intern. And of course, it didn't take long for us to establish that I was born in Murree and he was the first American, maybe the only one, I think, come to think of it. The counselor, this was before the capital moved. The capital was still in Karachi. It was getting ready to move to Islamabad, and there it was in Murree as well. But Murree in those years was interesting for a lot of reasons. And I did want to just pick up, the last thing I'll mention is the Sands home, because I think that was one of the things that we've talked about. I was actually just there a few days ago. It's Jikka Gully. And by the way, if you want to see something transformed, Jikka Gully, that's the place of traffic jams, I think, for people coming up on the highway from Islamabad. But it's a lot different from when I was growing up in the tea shops and stuff like that, that they were all there. But Sands home is up the hill. Sands home, if you Google it, it's one of a network of maybe 36 homes that Lady Sands in Ireland created for British soldiers, not just in British India, but in Europe and Scotland and Ireland and everywhere else. I could be wrong, but I think that Sands home, that, by the way, in India, there was one in Quetta, there was one in Meerut, there was one in Rawalpindi, and there was one in a couple other places as well. I could be wrong, but I think Sands home is the last of the standing Sands home. Well, I mean, it's a footnote in history. Maybe people don't think it matters, whatever. But as Omar says, it's a stunning building. I mean, the exterior of this thing, it's one of those historical treasures. Yeah, sure, it goes back to the British era and all that, but it's a lovely building. And again, I'm getting a historic angle. Maybe it's the last of the Sands home still standing. And, it's worthy of, certainly worthy of a picture in the second edition, which I think is Omar's intention.
So, Umar, you mentioned some folklore about Murree in the book. Some yetis made an appearance. There were some ghost houses, etc. And I want to know more about that. Tell us some of the most striking myths about Murree that you came across while you were doing your research for the book.
I think, I mean, there are a lot of, I would say, the myths about Murree. The first is basically in its name, that whether Murree or Murree, where Murree comes from. So there is a popular, I would say, myth that Murree was traveling from somewhere to Kashmir, and she actually died here. And there is actually a basically small tomb on Pindi Point of Murree. But I think Murree name comes actually from, in Pothohar, there's a word used, Murree. Murree is like the place at a height. So I think, so that's one story. So even there was an British engineer, there is a story that he said something bad about that tomb or that grave. And when he was just walking out or driving out, and he got like a stone struck on his head, and he died right there. So that's that are all the kind of, there used to be a ghost town, actually, a ghost house, actually very near Smear Point. But there used to be a story that a whole British regiment actually died in that particular house. But that house is now taken down. But I remember in my childhood looking at that house from far off, and we would never dare go close to that. Then again, as Jonathan mentioned about this Masonic lodge, so there was a there was a Masonic lodge, which is Nutwood House, which is probably the first standing, the most old standing house in Murree. It's in Presentation Convent, Murree. So Nutwood House. Then there are still cottages. One of the cottages just in my picture behind me. This is Hecton House. There were like there was a string of these cottages actually. North Cottage, the Park Cottage. These were also belong to these Freemasons. So those Freemasons have, as you all know, they were a secretive organization, and they had all their own stories. And but yeah, so these were some of the, I think, stories. But I think I've decided these a bit like I would say ghost stories. I think there are a lot of other stories which are much more I think interesting as well. Like I was fascinated by Benazir Bhutto studying at convent of Jesus and Mary from 1964 and 65. I went there, I got their admission register out, and I was actually able to find exact her entry in that register, which is in the book as well. And along with Sanam Bhutto, they actually lived there from 1964 to 65 for more than I think 1.5 years. And during 1965 war, actually, they were both there. And I was then reading Benazir Bhutto's own autobiography, and she mentions that they would sleep with their sleepers on, so that if they have to run, then they don't lose their sleepers, and they were all ready for an Indian attack, and that kind of. So it brings, it humanized the Murree for a lot of us, actually. Similarly, there was another very interesting student, Akbar Jahan of Convent of Jesus and Mary, who, ultimately married who ultimately married Sheikh Abdullah of Kashmir, and then you know that the whole Kashmir Abdullah dynasty is from that. She used to be called Iron Lady. So she had a fascinating story. Her father was an Austrian or East European, and her mother was a Gujar lady from Kashmir, and they fall in love, and then they got married, and then there used to be a Nido's hotel in Lahore, and people who know Nido's hotel in so she belonged to that family. So that's again a very, I think, fascinating story of how one student of Convent Jesus Mary impacted, I would say, the whole political history of Kashmir. I think a couple of other stories which are very interesting about Murree, and probably we don't know about, a lot of people don't know about it, are like Major Hudson, the infamous Major Hudson. I actually use the word the butcher of Richwell Road in Murree. He actually arrested Bahadur Shah Zafar in 1857 war and actually executed his, I think, 2 or 3 princes. But he also had a house on Richwell Road near Kashmir Point. His own daughter died at Murree, and I couldn't find her grave, but she also died in Murree. And Major Hudson also met a similar fate later on in 1858. Last but not the least, I'm in the infamous General Dyer of Jallianwala Bagh. He was born. He was son of one of the founders of Murree Brewery, and he was also born in Murree. So these are all stories associated with Murree, I would say, and there are, many others. If we have time, I'll narrate later. But the Italian owners of Cecil, and so I can continue. Yeah. Thank you.
There were many other popular people that names that you came across in visitors' books. There was one. You must tell us some of the stories. There was, yeah, please.
Okay, so I think one fascinating story was that I visited this Chare-Han Forest Rest House, which was almost like it's gone down, but now they have again renovated it. It's near Jika Gali, so on a mountain. So I was with a forest guard, I would say, and forest guard would tell me a story of our current Prime Minister Imran Khan visiting at some point in time in 1992, and I was like, whenever I go to these rest houses and I ask the caretakers, so they will always come up with a story of some famous actor or Imran Khan or even Nawaz Sharif or somebody. And at times it's true, at times you are just like that, okay, this is story. So, but that story got me going. So he told me that he stayed there for like 3 or 4 days. So I was not very convinced, but then I went to this local forest office and I said, where is the visitor's book of that particular rest house? So they had that, I think 100 years old visitor's book, and I just started flipping through the pages. Come 1992 and August 1992, and I see, Imran Khan, and he stayed there for like 5 days, and he wrote something like, the electricity is not there, the water is not there, something should be improved. And I just loved it. I thought that probably that was the time that he thought he should join politics, but I'll probably stop here.
I really like that line.
Yeah,
maybe that was the reason.
So I actually have that photo of his signatures in the book as well. So I think one story, and then I'll stop over here. I think which I kind of like when you say that I've done something original. So there is this Dora Nicholson who died, who was the wife of this engineer who was making this Dunga Gali Murree pipeline in 1890s. So I read somewhere that she died at Dunga Gali. So when I went to Dunga Gali, I asked local people that is there a graveyard here, Christian graveyard, and they were like, no, there is nothing like that here. I went to the church. They said, no, we don't know about any graveyard. So I was, one fine morning, I was standing in Nathiagali with my kids, and they were doing their balloon shooting and whatever. And there was this Baba who was the vendor for that balloon shooting. And I asked him, Baba, do you know about any Christian graveyard in Dungagali? He said, Hannah. He said, yeah, it is there. I said, where it is? He said, there is this Christian graveyard. And I realized that when he says Christian, it's actually Christian. And then he actually, gave me good, exact points that where should I find that graveyard. I went there. There were actually graveyards. There were no epitaphs, unfortunately, there, but there was a graveyard actually almost opposite the church on the other side of the road. And I've actually given the GPS bearings of that particular spot. So I was very happy in a way that, people would say that there are people who find happiness in finding graveyards, but I was happy in the way that, I was able to find that Christian graveyard, which should have been in Dunga Gali. So I think somebody else should do a research whether Dora was buried right there or what. But yeah, so that was an interesting story for me. Thank you.
Yeah. So Jonathan, Umar discusses a lot of old buildings and cottages in his books. Which ones do you remember the most from your childhood, and why?
Well, one of the old buildings was the post office, which kind of anchored the mall, and you'd be up there. And I came back. I've been coming in and out of Pakistan for many years, and of course, at one time I came back and it had been completely modernized. And I don't know which government or which administration did it, but I thought, oh no, that's gone. But they took it back. You probably know the story. Somehow they restored it. Maybe Omar knows the story better than I do. But I think it's a classic sort of Mussoorie, Shimla, Murree kind of post office. Again, evocative of the era. But it's good. I think it is one of the iconic buildings of Murree for sure. It's interesting. The churches survive. I don't think perhaps most people know it, but Holy Trinity, the big church on the mall, is the Anglican church, more English oriented, and down the way is St. Margaret's, which is the old Scottish Presbyterian church. And I know from a distance, people aren't necessarily aware of all the different denominations or whatever, but I think that Holy Trinity is a treasure, actually. I mean, the stained glass windows there are beautiful. There is a history that's shown in the markers and along the walls and stuff like that. Again, it's evocative, obviously, of the British era, although it's still used now. It's the Church of Pakistan as well. But again, it's moved way beyond that. The picture, by the way, I'm looking at the picture back of Omar's image there. That to me is kind of like the classic Murree architecture. And I don't know if you can see it, but on the veranda, there's this sort of, I guess I'd call it St. Andrew's cross. These sort of cross things painted green or whatever. And when I was in Murree just last week, in fact, I was looking, and there are a few buildings that are adopting that motif, which I think is really good, because when you look ahead for the future of Murree, you want to sort of have some kind of link to the past. You kind of want to have a distinctive style. Unfortunately, of course, a lot of concrete apartments are being put up or whatever, but you wish that somehow some of that some of the architecture could be maintained. So again, the iconic buildings for me are certainly the post office, and I think the churches, of course, St. Denis as well. I think Lawrence College. I mean, what a collection of amazing buildings. I think Lawrence College is one of the places that people don't see unless they have somebody to visit there, because they're a bit hidden away. Some of them, like Holy Trinity and the post office, are right there for everybody to see. One thing to sort of squeeze in there too. And again, I realize the decades are going on, but years ago, I guess it was Paul Scott wrote a book called Staying On, which was that small number of Britishers that stayed on for different reasons. They were post 1947, And it's evocative to me because in the 60s, I did see a few of those guys that stayed on. Some of them sort of, roaming the mall or whatever. There's one person I want to give a shout out to because this is the Golf Hotel. Maybe Omar knows, I don't know if the Golf Hotel even still stands, but it was also sort of a old style thing. And there's an artist called Hal Bevan Petman, who every summer went up there and painted portraits of people. And a lot of them were the wives and officers of the military army. You will see from the 60s and 70s at mess halls all over Pakistan, Bevan Petman's portraits. He later started to do battle scenes. So all the famous battles, well, not all of them, but many of the famous battles in independent Pakistan, some pretty heroic scenes. Those also were, of course, purchased by the mess halls and are displayed there. It's interesting, a piece of history, because my parents one summer said, okay, we're going to have our kids have their portraits done. So there it is, Hal Bevan Petman. But he is in actually some of his museums, in some of the museums around here. There's been some exhibits in Karachi of Hal Bevan Petman, but he's yet one more. You mentioned the characters associated with Murree. Hal Bevan Petman is yet another of those figures that lived at old age and really had their impact in Murree, over the years. And again, I guess this is the last comment, looking ahead, I guess as Iqbal had always said, time never stands still. Everything's moving, everything's moving, everything's moving. Obviously, Murree's much more populated. I think I started my memoir by saying I was born in a small town in the Himalayas looking over Kashmir. The name of the town was Murree. If someone comes up to Murree now, they're going to say, what, you were born in a small town? It's a huge, almost like a city. Although when I was born, it was small. And, you hope that even as Murree grows, and it's a wonderful place for people to go for all kinds of reasons, but you hope they can somehow maintain and sustain some of those links with the past. And, history is history. It is what it is. And I think that that's one of the assets that Murree has too, those iconic buildings such as the post office.
True. Which brings me to my next question. So Umar, the Murree that you predominantly talk about in the book is the Money of Pre-Partition. It seems that after 1947, things in Murree began deteriorating exponentially. And in recent times, there has been a lot of sometimes not very aesthetically pleasing construction around all these colonial buildings, old cottages, for example, GPO as well. Rest houses that you mentioned in your book. Who allowed all this, and why does it still go on?
This would be an explosive question, Vijaya, but just to give you some idea that I think Murree, I would say, survived till 1980s and 90s, but then people tell me, I mean, I was not there, but then when we had this new local government, new local government in 2001, it was an excellent, I would say, legislation. But what it also did was that it just brought everything to local tehsil heads, and at that point in time there was mushroom growth of buildings. And then in the last, I would say, 2 or 3 years, there used to be a ban on construction in Murree until recently, about 3 years back. And in last 3 years, it has again, the ban has somehow gone away. And now you will see construction all around in Murree. I think there is some, I would say, now some understanding that how heritage should be conserved. For example, this GPO building was pathetic a few years back, but I think in 2015, I would say, the government basically put together professors and architects from NCA, and they did this renovation job. So in a very professional way, I would say. So similarly, I think recently somebody was telling me that Cecil is undergoing this main building. I mean, all around it are like ugly apartments, but Cecil main building. So that has probably been taken by one of the big hotel groups in Pakistan, and they are doing again a good job in kind of like trying to renovate it into a heritage hotel. I would say Lockwood Hotel has actually done a decent job. I would not say great job, but I think a decent job in trying to keep the heritage and provide services to their customers as well. So there are people who are thinking on those lines. Those are few. I think, but I think if the government is able to put a bit like legislate a bit like tough on the buildings and especially the hotel regulations, I would say the Galliard Development Authority in KP has done a better job on that particular thing, especially in Nathia Gali and everywhere. They are, because that's a development authority, I think they are doing a better job, and I think some similar models should be also be used in Murree before it's too late. It's late, but it shouldn't be too late. Yeah.
Yeah, because referring to this recent construction, you say at one place in your book, tragically, it is now too late for Murree to reverse the damage. Why do you think so? Can it be reversed? Can anything be done?
Yeah, one, I think still Murree has a lot to offer, as I say repeatedly. So I think that has not gone. So even if we do it now, we just halt what's degradation is going on, whether it's about waste, whether it's about construction, whether it's about generally deforestation. I think we can still revive Murree to a great extent. I do think that a lot of damage has already been done. If you see the picture I used from GPO, I think behind GPO it's like monstrous 6-story or 7-story hotel. So you cannot even take a decent picture of Murree, the GPO. So, and that's true about all the buildings, Cecil, all around their apartments. But I still think that, so if we have a political will, and if there is somebody who takes Murree under their umbrella or under their arms, I still have hope. So we are also trying to do something on a very small level, but let's see. Yeah.
So what would be your top 3 recommendations for sustainable tourism in Murree, or for that matter, any tourist destination?
I think, Vijaya, one thing is very strict building controls. I think there used to be a regulation during British times that you cannot block the view of someone by your building. So the buildings can go down on a slope. They cannot come in front of you. So they cannot block my valley view. So that was one. So that was a very, I think, intelligent kind of regulation. So which helped that people don't just construct monstrosities all across the mountain. So one, building control. The second, I would say, traffic management. That we all know what's happening in Murree, and how things are like when, especially on the weekends or in the summer season or on national holidays. I think we can do traffic management in terms of how many vehicles can enter Murree. We can create parking plazas. I think it needs a lot of, again, I say, political will as well as the will of the government. So I think that is also, and I think third thing is awareness and advocacy. I think we should tell people that it's their place. I mean, it's their heritage, it's their landscape, or it's their, town. So they should, commercial interests are important, and I would say that you have to create a win-win situation. But then, nobody stops us from at least collecting garbage in a proper way. So I was talking to these people from Nestle, and we were trying to come up. They have started in Hunza in some sort of like packaging the plastics and sending it back to for proper disposal. So I was talking to, and probably we would try to do something similar in consultation with the government, to do something similar where the plastic can be brought back out of Murree in some way. So some initiative like that, and then one initiative, I would say a small initiative, is developing some sort of a Murree museum in so that people say what's Murree history in terms of both colonial as well as local history. So some steps like these, I think, would definitely be helpful. Yeah.
Jonathan, would you like to add anything to it?
I think he's really covered the bases. I think traffic management is one of the big things. I think, I hate to say this, but all of us have been there, and I think the garbage pickup that Omar was referring to, again, I just came back last week and I was going down, and those nullas are, I hate to say it, but those nullas are turned into trash. And I thought there's a classic picture of family picnicking in one of the hills, and they're just like bottles and stuff all over the place. And, I guess that's part of, I don't know if it's a cleanup or what, but, I think that too is, I guess it's the aesthetics of it, but I think that's a relatively easy thing to do to figure out a system, maybe an incentive-based system to pick up the trash and, clear those things out. So I think that those, definitely capture it. I will say one thing that people may be surprised and maybe contradictory, but I was noticing when I came up there, obviously there's houses everywhere. You go and look down in the valleys and there's all the tin roofs you can see and all that kind of stuff. But in some places where there are forests, the forests are actually thicker than I remember it when I was a kid. Because, and I don't know if that's a success. If it's a success, then I tend to say, let's take hope from wherever we find it. And if the forestry people have managed to do that. But, again, amidst all the man-made structures, the trees in the forest, well, what should I say? The Ogden Nash Post, I think I'll never see a billboard as pretty as a tree. Indeed, if the billboards don't soon fall, I'll never see a tree at all. And, it's that kind of, you have this really strange juxtaposition of, on a clear day, an incredible landscape. And even there are places where the forestry and the national beauty survives. And again, I'm trying to find a bright spot. Honest to goodness, I think in some of the places that I saw, in the isolated places, it's more of a forest now than it was 40 years ago when I was growing up.
So would you at some point in time, like to write a book about your days in Murree?
Well, I don't know if, for me, the some far and distant place, the most evocative chapters there are of Murree, to be honest. And again, I mentioned that, for our kids growing up, we felt, and, it's a luxury, it's a privilege and all that, but, to have your kids, whether it's in a summer camp or whether it's a place where they live, to grow up surrounded by incredible beauty is a wonderful gift that you can give to your kids. And I mean, that's just the reality. And maybe I feel it so strongly because, again, I was fortunate enough to see those Himalayas around me. And of course, the tough part is that you can't go anywhere else in the world and you can say, not as good as the Himalayas, not as good as the Himalayas. I mean, that's kind of like saying, Hunza and the Karakoram and all that. I mean, just spectacular. But I think it's a treasure for Pakistan. There's no doubt about it. And yeah, Murree itself is a man-made, has its own man-made history that has, good chapters and bad chapters, I suppose. But it's part of the history of Pakistan and certainly the landscape of Pakistan. When people are really down on Murree and I say, the buildings and all that, I say, again, you lift up your but what's the quotation? Lift up by, your eyes to the hills. I mean, those hills are beautiful. You just can't deny that.
Totally. So Umar, and when are you writing a book about the Galiyat? I'd really like to see hand-drawn maps of these places too. What are your future plans about that?
Actually, I think, Vijaya, there is a book out on Galiyat by, I think, Tahir Jahangir Saab. He has recently written a book. I think it would be, my next idea is I think about writing something about Nathia Gali. But I also am a bit like that whether I should write. I mean, the thought process is still going on. So whether I should pick Hunza Valley as one, whether it should be Chitral or whether it should be Nathia Gali, I'll see. But yeah, but there is a book on Galiyat already there. But you're right. I think the maps definitely help. So I'll definitely ask Sabah to make more of these maps. I think even those maps would be wonderful if we have maps of walled city of Lahore, for that matter, or walled city of Rawalpindi, or for all of these cities actually. But yeah, let's see. I mean, I'm thinking about that. What should be my next project? It definitely would be there. Whether it would be Nathia Gali, Hunza, or Chitral, I'll probably decide in few months. Yeah.
And of course, there's going to be a second edition of this book. That's
that's I want to close this. I mean, when I was writing this book, it continued and continued and continued. I started it in 2015, and then I just wanted to draw a line, but and publish it. But now I have a feeling that there are certain things I should add to the stories of Murree. So probably I'll go with a new edition as well. Yeah.
All right, so there's a question from the audience. What sort of pre-colonial histories of the region exist? I'm curious about what the region was like before the British colonizers arrived.
So not the best person to be asked this question, Vijaya, because I focused on colonial history, and the issue was that Murree is one of those towns which actually, I mean, if we are talking about this Murree Hill town, which actually was established in 1849. So while there are there are people, I mean, there are and very famous tribes like Abbasis or Satis or Dhuns, and who belong to this area for time immemorial, I would say. And there are, I mean, there would be history of those tribes, especially Masyari, I would say, if we are talking in relation to Murree. But yeah, that can be again a very interesting topic to research. I think this was part of Kashmir state at some point in time, probably before British, and then British took it over from them. And but yeah, I think that would be a very interesting topic to do. I mean, especially around these famous tribes of Murree, which are still there and which are there much more before British came. And yeah.
All right. So I want to talk to you both about a bit about the reasons or your reasons behind writing. How you began writing out your life, travel, and overall experiences. Was there any specific moment that you realized that you were going to write about these? Jonathan, you can go first.
Yeah, no, I've obviously couldn't survive as a full-time writer and have never even embarked on that path. I preferred to, be involved in stuff. But I think the 4 books I've written, one on Mongolia, one on Afghanistan, and 2 on Pakistan, kind of, presented themselves. Obviously, the most personal one was Some Far and Distant Place. And this was when I left Pakistan. I left Murree at the age of 18. With 2 high school classmates, we went through Peshawar, Kabul, Ghazni, Kandahar, Herat, on into Iran, on into Turkey, and that was sort of the coming of age story. But it really closed maybe quite tightly a chapter in my life. I didn't know if I'd ever get back to Pakistan. I've had some of my colleagues from that time that have never come back, and now we're talking about the 1970s. I spent the next 10 years ruminating over my childhood in Pakistan. I don't think I was incapacitated because I still went on to university. I still went on to my graduate school, and I guess there was it's a childhood memoir is what it is, but I read a book about childhood memoirs that was called When the Grass Was Taller, and the basic point was that you live life more vividly as a child, perhaps. The grass is taller than it really is, actually, because you're small. But I think in this day and time when so many books are produced, you really have to have a consuming desire to do a book. And in the case of I guess you call it my memoir, which I guess would be 1/3 set in Murree, 1/3 set in Sindh, where my parents worked, and 1/3 set in the United States, which ostensibly was my home country. It was sort of the questions of identity, the questions of crossing between cultures that you alluded to earlier. I think that was also a big part of it. But I guess rather than spend that decade spilling out my guts to psychiatrists, I spent that decade spilling out my guts in my memoir, which I think was a constructive way perhaps to do it. But I guess the last thing to say about that is, maybe the 2 quick things is, one, when I wrote that memoir, much of it about Murree, it was what I called in the United States the poor, poor, pitiful me genre of memoir. Vying to have such a horrible, I think in Angela's Ashes, that author there said, the worst kind of possible childhood you can imagine makes the best possible book. But I was kind of reacting on that because my memoir, by the way, if there's any overwhelming feeling about it, it's gratitude, it's wonder, it's astonishment. And I would say that Murree back in those days was part of that gratitude, part of that wonder, part of that astonishment. So I think that was a big part of it. And I also felt, again, I'm speaking here as, coming from a small subculture. And it's interesting, I've talked to Pakistanis that go to the States, and of course they feel, well, they become, part of a subculture there. But I think that subcultures tend to be subjected to stereotypes. And I think to some extent, and that's understandable. No matter where you are in the world, a subculture is going to be, looked at as a stereotype. And I guess that the second thing, along with a sense of wonder and gratitude and astonishment, is reacting to against the stereotypes, in this case, of missionary kids, and to some extent, maybe even the stereotypes of Pakistan I was reacting to, because I was back in the States now. So it was those kinds of themes that inspired it. And it is not a poor, pitiful me kind of memoir. It's much more, my goodness, how lucky I am, how much I should be grateful for it.
Nice. Umar?
Yeah, so I think very briefly, Vijaya, I think I want to share my experiences. And I started, I think, a bit early in my life. I think in college, I used to, my English teacher was, I think, one of the prime movers of why I should write. And I started with magazines, and then I jumped onto, I remember meeting Zafar Iqbal Mirza, just barging into an office when I was still probably 20 something. And he was gracious enough, and I used to write with, I mean, in pen and what should I say, on paper, and I used to give him my article, and he was gracious to edit it and get it printed, and so it started in that way. But what I still, I think the main reason I write is I want to share my stories and share my own experiences with people, and I think. And I love the feedback normally I give and normally I get. And I think I also wanted, when I was writing about Murree, I also wanted to document it, document some of this heritage. I wanted to geocode these places so that people who come after us or whatever, they should know what Murree used to be like. And the photograph was with that point of view, that I knew that some of these buildings would not be anymore. Already there, maybe we may have lost some of these buildings, but I just wanted to document. So I basically enjoy writing. So yeah.
Okay, so one last very important question. Did you find out the real story behind the change of Kashmir Villa Hotel's name to Dolphin Hotel? I really wanted to know if that is.
I think more than anything, it's a sign of times, I would say. I mean, why would somebody change name from Kashmir Villa
there has to be a reason.
yeah, but probably that would be in my next edition. I think just one last thing, Vijaya. I think the amazing thing about writing a book, or the experience I had, was that one day somebody told me that this Rockage Cottage and Estate belongs to me, and I am an investment banker based in Wall Street, New York, and I want to meet you sometime. And I had a breakfast with him in Murree. And then there was I saw a message from one Jonathan on my Facebook page once upon a time in Murree, and he said that I was born in Murree, and I just replied to him, what? And that what started in like I knowing him and the whole story of Jonathan coming to me. So, and I knew both where Jonathan was born in that Rockage Cottage and Estate. So I knew the people who own it now, and I knew the people who were born. I knew the person who was born in it. So that's the kind of like thing which fascinates me. So I'll stop here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Omar and Jonathan, for such a great discussion. I really enjoyed talking to you both about this book and all, see Murree in all its glory once again. Congratulations, Omar, on all the wonderful work that you've done with this book, and good luck for the future. And take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Yeah, grateful.